Welcome to the Veterinary Rehabilitation Podcast, where we aim to help fellow veterinary rehab therapists increase their knowledge and elevate their practice. I'm Megan Kelly.
And I'm Anae Lloyd. Together, we bring you the latest insights, research, and information in the field of veterinary rehabilitation.
This podcast is brought to you by Onlinepethealth, a leading continuing education membership for veterinary rehabilitation therapists. With Onlinepethealth, you will have access to a wide range of online resources to help you stay up to date with the latest techniques, advances, and trends in the industry.
Our podcast features in-depth conversations with leading experts in veterinary rehabilitation. They share their own experiences and knowledge to help you improve your practice. Whether you're a seasoned pro or just starting out in the field, our goal is to provide you with the tools and the insights you need to succeed.
So join us as we explore the exciting world of veterinary rehabilitation and help you take your practice to the next level. Hey vet rehabbers, in this fourth episode of our business series, we're shifting gears to explore traditional marketing, still one of the most powerful and often underutilized ways to grow your vet rehab practice. Now, from building strong veterinary referral networks to connecting with local pet-related businesses and showing up in your community, this kind of marketing is all about people, relationships, and trust. Whether you're a DVM or a non-DVM, navigating partnerships can look a little different, but both have so much potential. Francisco Maia from the Canine PT Academy covers everything from in-clinic strategies like brochures and education nights to community events and how to make them work for you. Plus, he digs into internal marketing, so another word for word of mouth, and small relationship building habits that can really make a big impact. If you're ready to grow your practice the old-fashioned way through authentic connections and local visibility, this episode is for you. Now, the Vet Rehab Summit is happening on the 8th of November. This is our annual online veterinary rehabilitation conference. We're very excited to have you for a full day of expert insights, inspiration, and connection. It's happening all from the comfort of your home online. This year's theme is Dynamic by Design, and we're going to explore canine and equine anatomy in motion. We're going to dive into biomechanics, muscle activation patterns, and movement science you can apply in practice right away. We've got free live tickets. The spots are limited. If you want full access to the lineup and all the recording sessions afterwards, you need to go over to the Vet Rehab Summit and register. A quick word from our sponsors before we dive into today's topic. At Paw Prosper, we believe true pet well-being demands a three-pronged approach: prevention, support, and rehabilitation. Our brands are trusted by veterinarians, universities, and rehab facilities alike. So whether you're looking to train, rehabilitate, or help your patients age gracefully, our brands, Walking Pets, Help 'em Up, Respond Animal Therapeutics, Fitpaws, Muffins, Halo, Sleepy Pod, and Canine Carts offer effective, innovative, and proven solutions. You can sign up today to receive a one-time special gift for all the Veterinary Rehabilitation Podcast listeners with your next order. Just go to pawprosper.com/OPH, and of course, you'll be able to see the Paw Prosper umbrella as well as all their brands on the 8th of November at the Vet Rehab Summit. All right, let's dive in.
Hi, guys, and welcome. Hi, Francisco. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Hello, everyone. Glad to be here for another day.
So today, Francisco is going to be talking about building relationships and partnerships through traditional marketing. Okay, Francisco, with that, over to you.
Sounds good. Thanks, Annette. But yeah, getting excited. And today we're going to shift gears and talk about, what I would call more traditional marketing strategies, really focusing on how do we build relationships and how we build partnerships, through those different marketing strategies that we can implement as well. All right. So let's start with the big one, which is veterinary referrals. And, after the last few days, you might be thinking that Francisco must hate veterinary referrals and he doesn't, waste his time talking to veterinary clinics or anything like that. But just as I shared my story on how building a predictable lead generation system has worked for us, I also wanted to share how we've been able then, especially over the last 4 years or so, really build up our veterinary partnerships, to the point where there are, combined with that predictable lead generation system, one of the pillars for how we've been able to grow our business over the last few years, right? So going back to early 2020, so if you guys remember, I started my business fall of 2017, but really started understanding this marketing thing and implementing more 2018 going into 2019. So then once it got to early 2020, I had just hired our first physical therapist beyond just myself. I had an administrative staff as well at that point in time that started with me in the summer of 2019. And we were getting ready to open our clinic. So we had started the build out for our space in September of 2019. We were getting ready to open, at about like February, March of 2020. And we had developed, especially because of everything that I talked about yesterday, a fairly consistent flow of leads that were coming through Google. But as we were about to grow and expand, I didn't want to necessarily to just over rely on Google. And when I was looking at the numbers, I remember at the end of the 2019 year and I planning for 2020, I was looking at my numbers for 2020. And I realized that, the good thing is that we really made Google work for us. But the thing I had to be very, had to have much caution about it was the fact that we were over relying too much on it. It was something like 60 to 70% of the new patients that we were getting were coming through Google, while veterinary referrals were only accounting for about 10% of the new patients that we were getting. So with that in mind, going into 2020, that's when I started to think about, okay, how can I be more intentional about developing a strategy that it is going to gradually build up those veterinary partnerships, understanding that those were going to take time, understanding that this is going to be a process, that it's not going to happen overnight, but especially because at that point in time, we had been in business for a couple of years already, right? So we had been in business for a couple of years and we had started to develop a very positive reputation with the veterinary community. So while 2 years prior to that, one of my struggle, was the skepticism, was the lack of understanding, how we did rehab a little bit different. And I talked about that yesterday. 2 years later, some of those same doors that were not open for me 2 years prior to that were now opening it up a little bit, meaning veterinarian clinics, veterinarian were a little bit more open to meet with me, to talk with me, to understand better, because at that point in time, they probably have had at least a couple, if not a few or a handful of patients, mutual patients that they saw. And the pet owner told them, about how much they loved our services, how much, they enjoyed the experience they got with us, or the veterinarians themselves got to see, the outcomes, got to see that post-op TPLO recovering pretty well, got to see that older arthritic patient, improving in mobility, improving in kind of quality of life and all that kind of stuff. So that started opening up some doors that were closed before. So I wanted to find ways to kind of take advantage of that and start building those relationships. So what I did is a couple of those clinics in early 2020, I was able to book a lunch and learn, because I thought at that point in time, I was like, you know what, I could stop by, I could drop off brochures and that kind of stuff. But what I really wanted to try to get was their attention. And I figured the best way I can actually have their attention for 30 to 45 minutes or so was if I went and I did a lunch and learn for their staff, so that way I could actually do a presentation to them and help them understand better what we did. So in January of 2020, I was able to book a couple of those lunch and learns for beginning of March. And that was good because it gave me the time to figure it out, what I would actually be talking about, what I would want to present during those lunch and learns. Because to be honest, I remember booking those lunch and learns, for a couple months down the road and being like, oh shoot, I have no idea what I'm even going to be talking about, right? But to be honest, that's me. That's how I operate and stuff. That's how, I've been on this journey. It's like I'll go for it first, and then afterwards I'll figure it out, how to do things and whatnot. But what I started doing then is like, okay, I need to present this lunch and learn, and I need to figure out what I want to focus on. I had a good idea, but I wanted to hear from people in our field what had been their experience. So what I did is I reached out to some, especially at that point in time, I used to know more PTs than veterinarians doing this just because of my inner circle. So I started reaching out to those PTs who I knew from around the United States, and also, went on one or two different Facebook groups and stuff, and looked at past threads, or even asked, what were people's experience with lunch and learn, how did that work for them, and all that kind of stuff. And the overwhelming response that I got is that for them, it had not been successful. That for them, they had gone, done a lunch and learn, spent their time, spent some of their money, right, to sponsor their lunch and learn, but then it didn't necessarily turn into referrals. So I started just try to probe a little bit more and ask more questions like, okay, like tell me more, what did you talk about, and all that kind of stuff. And the trend that I've realized was happening is that a lot of times they made the lunch and learn about them, about who they are, what they do, like about like their training and how they got to that point, and a lot about their modalities of services, trying to explain the physiology behind laser, try to show the research articles, showing how this works and how that's beneficial and this and that, and for me, I was thinking about it. I was like, okay, if I'm a veterinarian, if I'm a veterinary technician, a staff member of a vet clinic, and I have a busy day and I'm excited about a lunch and learn because, hey, I'm getting free food, like sitting down and listening to someone talk about research articles sounds like about the most boring thing ever, right? So I was like, okay, I don't think that's the route I want to go with, right? And me, at that point in time, I had a much better understanding about marketing, about how people think. So I was like, you know what I want to do is lean on that. I want to focus on helping educate them about how we help our patients, about how rehabilitation really, really works, try to, correct any false beliefs or anything like that they might have, and explain to them how rehab therapists really think, how we really kind of like work, which is very different, like, as we know, from the traditional medical way of thinking of things, because, we looked at more of the whole body. We looked at, the functional aspect of things, right? We're not looking just at the medical diagnosis of like, oh yeah, this dog has a left TPLO. I'm going to laser the knee and I'm going to strengthen the back legs. It's like, no, we look at the whole body. It's like, how is that affecting their back? How is that affecting the other leg? How is doing this, right? It's kind of like our way of doing things that for us, it makes total sense. But from someone from the outside, they don't understand that part of it, right? So I focused a lot on like that aspect of things with our presentation, with our lunch and learn. And then I also wanted to try to show it to them as much as I could, a visual of how that would look like. So I shared a case study about, our rehab progression in that instance with a post-op TPLO patient, including some videos on kind of like how we would progress things, what we would be doing, especially because, right, going back to the fact that I didn't have an underwater treadmill, I wanted it to help them visualize, help them see. It's like, okay, how does rehab really work without an underwater treadmill? And educating them at the same time in terms of like why we don't have one and why, we don't need one, why, this goes well beyond just any modality of service kind of like stuff, right? So what I did, even planning for those lunch and learns, is literally I sat down. I remember sitting down, and much like, I had built my target audience, my avatar for the clinic, I started thinking about, so that same exercise, right, we talked about on day 2 of this week, I started thinking about, okay, who is my avatar for a veterinarian, for a veterinary clinic? And I started just kind of like going through that exercise and writing down what did I think would be their objections to, be referring patients to me. What did I think would be a false belief that they will have about canine rehab? What kind of questions, they could potentially have throughout the presentation, about about rehab in general, about what we do, but also about myself, about my level of training, my expertise, right? Going back to what I mentioned yesterday, that at that point in time, at least around here in Chicago, I was the first non-veterinarian doing this on their own. So, try to explain to them like, okay, what what's my level of training, how do I got to this point, right? So they could understand that also I just didn't take a weekend course and then suddenly I'm doing this, that there was a process to it. There was, a lot of years in training that went into this to kind of like help build that trust, help build that understanding of what I do. So basically, right, I sat down and started writing down all those things, building out my avatar basically for a veterinary clinic, for a veterinarian, thinking about how I could build their trust and confidence while educating them about our approach to canine rehab, so that way I could tailor that presentation, focus on those aspects of things. And like I mentioned, the reason why I went that route is because at that point in time, I had a much better understanding about marketing, about all these things that I'm teaching you and stuff. And I knew that was going to, like, that message was going to really have to kind of like get their attention, basically. And also at that point in time, I had started spending more time trying to understand a little bit more about the psychology behind how we humans tend to think, especially when it comes to selling someone on something, when it comes to building trust, building relationships, and that kind of stuff. So I started kind of like putting all those things together in terms of like how I wanted that presentation to basically look like. And one of the things I've learned through the process of understanding how people think a little bit more is that one of the most effective ways for us to break down any objection that someone might have towards, in this instance, referring to us, or even if we're talking, about a client's understanding our value, understanding our price point, or whatever it may be. But one of the most effective ways that we can break down people's objections is simply by addressing those questions before they actually become an objection, right? So before they would even ask me about the underwater treadmill, for example, I would already talk about it on the presentation. Before they would even ask me about how did I make my transition from human PT to canine rehab, I would talk about that. Before they had any questions about how the veterinary referral process would work and how does it work in terms of like the liability and whatnot, I would talk about that, right? So think about it. If you are watching a presentation and the speaker already answers your questions as the presentation goes along, right? And you're going through the questions in your mind, and you're maybe even making a notice like, oh yeah, I might want to ask this question. But then before you even get the opportunity to ask the question, they already answered that for you, right? So when you are in that scenario, that builds trust. You come out of that presentation feeling like, okay, this person knows what they're talking about. They knew it's kind of like we think like they were reading my mind. They knew what I was going to ask before I even asked them about it, right? So that goes back to that psychology, that goes back to that avatar and understanding who is that we're kind of like talking to. So you can take everything that we talked about on day 2 and apply to any of those things as well. Not just the veterinary referrals, right? That's kind of like, what I did in this instance, but even when we talk a little bit later about, how to build relationship with other pet businesses, how to talk to people at community events and all that kind of stuff, right? So we have to be able to kind of like keep those things in mind, basically. But that's how I prepare for those 2 lunch and learns that I did. And it ends up that they were incredibly well received. And not only those 2 lunch and learns I did, and they both happened in early March of 2020, so right before like COVID like really, really kind of like shut things down and stuff. But they turned into great partnerships that, for years, those clinics ended up referring to us. One of them ended up getting sold to corporation a couple of years later. So they don't refer to us like they did at that point in time, right? But that's also part of what I have seen for myself and for clients too. So that's why I caution about over-relying on veterinary referrals, right? Because I've seen the scenario happen where suddenly we have a great referral partner. Oh, they got sold to a corporation, and then it changes everything. And then you might not necessarily be getting those referrals anymore. But the greatest thing about those lunch and learns was the feedback I got from them, from some of the staff, or even from one of the veterinarians too. And it gave me the confidence that I was on the right track, especially when at the end of one of those, one of the veterinarians stayed a little bit longer to talk to me, to introduce himself. And he shared like how that presentation really helped him understand so much better how rehab works and how excited he was to start referring patients to us, because he had been referring patients to another clinic in Chicago. And he said that, I referred to them primarily because I didn't know there was anyone else doing this. But now I'm just really excited about our approach and how we can do things. And as you can imagine, he did turn into a great referral partner for years. But like I said, that all happened right before COVID. So of course, then with COVID, we weren't able to then do those in-person lunch and learns for a period of time. But then what we did later in 2020 and then in 2021, I started hosting some of those lunch and learns like virtually, over Zoom. And that worked pretty well too. I was excited, I think it was in 2022, to then start doing some of those back in person again. Zoom was okay, but I think that connection definitely works so much better once like I'm able to talk with them in person, I believe, just like the body language, and I can see how people are reacting to the talk and stuff. I can adjust things a little bit better on the go, right? Where virtually you don't get that kind of like, visual feedback, visual response as much. But then we continue with that strategy, and we continue to host, maybe one or two of those, a month or something like that. Of course, some months more or less, depending on the time of the year, how busy clinics are, how busy we are, And it's not like all of those through the years turned into rockstar partnerships, So I mentioned that because, of course, some of those will go better than others for an array of different reasons. But, if we're consistent with it, if you make this intentional and you figure it out how to make a presentation that really connects with them in that level, right, then it becomes a numbers game. And the more of those partnerships that you can build, then the more referrals you're going to start over time receiving, right? So going back to the numbers, because as I mentioned before, I love tracking numbers. At that point in time in 2019, going into 2020, so 2019, our veterinary referrals accounted for 10% of the leads that would come through the business. Then 2020, that went up to 16%. 2021, that went up to 23%. And then in 2022, it went up to 30%. And then over the last few years, it has been between 30 to 35%, right? So you can see there was a progression to it, right? But I shared that so you can see that this strategy can work. However, for most of us, it is going to take some time to build it up, and success with them is not going to happen overnight, But one thing we have to keep in mind is to be intentional and not just plan on like dropping off some brochures and thinking that like that's marketing to veterinary clinics, right? A lot of times I talk to people, they're like, yeah, friend, I dropped off all these brochures to 30 clinics, around town and stuff, and I'm not getting a single referral from them. It's like, well, that's not a strategy, right? We need to have a plan. We need to, for example, pick the clinics that you really want to target, and remember that you're much better off being intentional about your plan with 5 of those clinics rather than, dropping off things for 20 to 30 clinics and just seeing what stick, right? So that's what I mean by having a plan. Not just drop off stuff and think that that's good enough, but figuring it out. Okay, what's the next step? What are the clinics that I should focus on, based on maybe what they do, based on their approach to veterinary medicine, geographical location, whatever it may be, right? And try to make it very specific in terms of like, what am I going to do with this game plan? How is this process going to work, rather than just dropping things off and expecting that that's going to be it. Does that make sense? And then the other thing to keep in mind when it comes to veterinary referrals is to not forget then over time to nurture the veterinary partnerships that you have developed as well, right? So don't think that it's always just about, oh, how do I get more of these? How do I get in front of more and more veterinary clinics, right? But how do I keep the partnerships that I have going smoothly, right? So that way they don't forget about us over time, right? So for example, using potential dates like holidays or Vet Tech Appreciation Week, to show your appreciation to them, right? And then that's when it's really good to drop off some goodies, drop off, things that is going to make the team, their staff feel good. If it's cakes, if it's sweets. Last year, what we did for Veterinary Tech Appreciation Week is we picked, I think it was like our top 10 veterinary referral partners, and we asked them how many staff members they had, and we put together a goodie bag with some items, with some things for each staff member, kind of like trying to give something individualized to each one of them, to a certain extent and stuff, right? So you need to kind of like think of ways of like how you can be intentional with that as well. Another great way, I feel like, to continue building on that awareness about what you do, about your level of training, about your expertise and whatnots, and nurturing those relationships, is to share, a veterinary report, with your referral partners. So for example, for us, after every evaluation, they get, a copy of our report so they can look at it and whatnot and understand better what we do. And that helped open a lot of doors in the past. Veterinary clinics who were a little bit skeptic about me and being like, wait, who is this person? What's their level of training? They would look at that and be like, okay, like they actually know what they're talking about, right? Now, do they read the whole thing? Likely not, right? They're busy, right? We get that. You guys understand that. But it can still be a great way in the long run to show them our level of expertise, to show they like what we're planning in terms of rehab, what we're thinking, how we're progressing things, so that way they're able to build that trust, build that confidence, especially if you don't have those relationships going into it, right? So what I mean by that, like I said, for me, I didn't have any of those veterinary relationships. I didn't know any vets besides just my own vet when I started it. Sometimes I work with especially veterinarians who are making that transition from general practice to rehab, and they've been doing this long enough where they know different veterinarians around town. They have those connections, which of course then we should definitely like leverage those. But especially if you're in a new area that you move to, or if you are trying to build that trust into what you do, that can be a great way to kind of like show them your knowledge, show them your expertise, right? So hopefully, to wrap up in terms of veterinary referrals, you understand now that I'm not against them whatsoever, like actually far from it. But what I don't want is for us to over rely on them. And that's what I tend to see, basically. Let's get going to the next thing then, because otherwise I'm going to start running behind schedule again. But pet businesses, okay? So that's another great way to build partnerships as well. So don't focus just on veterinary clinics, but what are other pet businesses, especially depending on where you are in the country, in the United States, different countries. Like there's so many different other professional pet businesses opening up. Some of them very closely related to what we do, like maybe like a dog massage therapist or a fitness trainer or something like that, right? But even other businesses like a dog boarding facility, or other things like that. So in regards to like building those relationships and networking, we're going to need to talk to them as well, right? Not just veterinarians, so we can start getting even more of that exposure, that awareness about our business and about canine rehab as a whole. Especially if you're just starting, that can be a great way to bring the awareness that your business now exists, basically. Now, what is the mistake that we tend to make very often when it comes to this thing? And it's actually the same mistake we tend to make with our messaging in general, as we tend to just try to tell them that we do canine rehab, basically, right? So that perfect message that we discussed on day 2 not only applies, right, like I said, to how we approach veterinary partnerships and all that kind of stuff, but it's going to be the whole messaging as a whole, right? So even when you go talk to these businesses, even when you go talk to these people, think about that too. It's like, okay, what is the message that you're trying to get across? Because they don't understand how rehab works. They don't understand what we do. And more likely than not, they probably have the same preconceived notion that it's like, oh yeah, it's underwater treadmill, isn't it? Right? Or I'm sure you've got this too. It's like, oh yeah, I do dog rehab and physical therapy. Oh yeah, cool. So like you massage dogs? It's like, well, yeah, I mean, that's one thing that I can do, but right, it goes well beyond that, right? So it's just a lack of understanding. And to be fair to people, even as a human physical therapist, that's an issue that we have with our message in terms of like what physical therapy entails, right? I remember 10 years ago, or even longer, when I came out of school almost 15 years ago, people were like, oh, you're a physical therapist. I'm like, yeah. Oh yeah, so you massage and you stretch people? It's like, well, if needed, yeah, right. But that's just, one of the things I can do. So it's just a lack of understanding of what we do, what it entails. And it's up to us to kind of like educate them on it, right? And there's certainly a lot of ways that we can partner with other pet businesses. Some of them are more time consuming on us than others. So it all depends what is our strategy, where we at that point in time with our business and whatnot, because it could range simply from, doing a meet with them, and exchanging education material, marketing material, business cards, brochures, or something like that. Have theirs available for your clients in your lobby and vice versa, have them having your stuff available for their clientele and stuff. But it could go beyond that too. It could be about you guys maybe co-hosting different events together. It can be about, you participating on each other, like open houses or something like that, or maybe even co-hosting a workshop about a particular topic, that will be beneficial to like a mutual target audience, so there's many ways that it can kind of like look like. And one of those ways that usually tends to work really well, for example, that I have seen work well, not for me, because I don't focus on sport and agility dogs, but I have worked with clients who that's their niche, that's their specialty, and they co-host workshops with agility clubs, with, agility centers, focusing on maybe injury prevention, focus on like, best ways to recover after competition, like focus on particular topics that's going to be relevant to that audience, basically, right? So that's one example that I can think of that, like, yes, like something like this can work really well. And going back to what Annette mentioned about being an introvert, I completely understand how for a lot of us, it can be extremely uncomfortable to stand in front of people and give a presentation to them. I'm also an introvert, like I shared yesterday, and I had to work for a decent amount of time on my ability to speak in public, on my ability to even do things like this, doing this event online for you guys and stuff. And one of the things, and I'm not saying maybe this is going to work for everyone, but one of the things I kept telling in the back of my head to just push me through that feeling of uncomfortableness, that fear of like getting up and speaking in public, of speaking to a group of individuals, of speaking to a veterinary clinic with the Lunch and Learn. But one of the things that really helped me was to keep reminding myself that as uncomfortable as that could be, especially for the first few Lunch and Learns that I did and the first few maybe Facebook Lives and presentations that I did, as uncomfortable as that could be, it's still not as uncomfortable as not having any patients to see. That's what I keep telling myself. This is uncomfortable, but it's going to be even more uncomfortable if I cannot pay my bills, right? And for me, that was like a kick in the butt to be like, all right, let's just get better at this. Let's practice. Let's figure it out, what we can do to get better at this, right? And it came over time. It came with learning. It came with repetition. It came with doing more and more of this kind of things that naturally, then I just got better and better at it, right? But I used that for me as a driver, as a push to make through the feelings, making through those fears, to the point where today I can go, if a clinic calls and they're like, Fran, can you host a Lunch and Learn tomorrow? And my schedule is open. Yes, I can do it. Like, I don't need any lead prep time or anything like that. I just need about 10, 15 minutes to look at their websites, just to understand better what they do, who they are, that kind of stuff, because that helps me tailor things a little bit. But I can go in, I can do my presentation like just fine, because I have done so many of those basically at this point in time. That's what I'm trying to say, right? So I don't know if this is having this mindset is something that is helpful, but at least for me, like it was something that it really helped me push through those fears. And then same thing to community events. Like personally, this is not a strategy I have focused on too much for some different reasons, and majority of it being the time commitment. Some of it was the timing of when I could do those Lunch and Learns. We had COVID and all, not Lunch and Learns, community events. I mean, we had COVID and stuff, right? And the time commitment is tough, because they can take like even a 2-3 hour community event on a Saturday ended up taking 5-6 hours of your day, by the time you account for driving to the place, setting things up, being there for 2 or 3 hours, then putting things away and then driving home, and right now I'm just at a point in my life where I don't have time for that. Now, as I shared yesterday, I did some of those back when I started, back in 2018. I did some of those, right, through what I'll call like the hustle marketing before I started building the predictable lead generation system. And it worked, in combination with other things. I got clients, I got busy from doing a lot of those things. Now, the problem with it is that then as I got busy, I didn't have time anymore to do those things. And that was, what I shared a little bit about yesterday. So those things can work. And actually, I think some of it, what I have noticed too, it depends on your target audience as well. But also it depends a little bit on where you at geographically. So for example, I have some of my mentees that I've worked with the business coaching and stuff, where they live in an area of the country where the weather is warmer all year round. So because of that, there are more of those events throughout the whole year. Where here in Chicago, those events mostly tend to take place between like May and August, because that's kind of like our warm season. Like you don't want to be doing an event in February in Chicago when it is, literally like 0 degrees Fahrenheit, negative 10 degrees Celsius outside, right? That like no one wants to do that, So I think there is some kind of like geographical component to it, where in some areas, just people in general, pet owners are more keen on even attending those types of events because of it, right? But even taking a step back to the type of leads that we see, remember that we talked about the cold lead, warm leads, and community events are for the most part going to bring us those colder leads. People that have a younger, healthy dog that don't necessarily have anything going on at this point in time. So for me, a good strategy to keep in mind with those events is to have something that is going to incentivize them to share with you their contact information, their name, phone number, and email, basically. So you can do a raffle or whatever it may be. But then afterwards, you enter them into your CRM software, into your email marketing system, so that way you can continue that conversation with them through newsletters, through educational components, or you can, depending on what you're running the raffle, right, as part of them running for the raffle, they have to give the contact information and follow you on social media, right? So that way they start seeing your social media posts where you educate them over time. They get to see what you do, basically finding ways where over time you can keep educating them. So that way, later on, months later, years later, whatever it may be, if something happens with their dog, they're going to potentially think about you and be like, oh yeah, there is that business that I met at that event. The guy was super nice, or I've been following them online and I can see that they might be able to help me. Let me contact them, and that's kind of like how a lot of those things kind of like work over time. Now, can you at times do some of those events and meet someone who becomes a client the very following week or the very following month? Like, yes, that can absolutely happen. And like I said, back when I started, I did have some of those instances. I did get some more immediate clients, if you will, for it. But the thing I would just caution is in terms of your expectation. It's like the expectation of going into those community events, expecting that suddenly the next week, you're going to have like 3-4 new patients coming from those events, right? So that's kind of like where I see people get frustrated about making those work for us. And then the last thing is what I call internal marketing, right? So what I mean by internal marketing is simply how can we create strategies to hopefully make word of mouth referrals from current and past clients a little bit more intentional, right? Because that's the main challenge with word of mouth referrals. It's how unpredictable they can be. We have very little to no control over that. So what are different things potentially that we can do internally to help drive those up, right? So it can be like client appreciation events. It can be making sure that you have educational material available for people to take with them. It can even be like a discount coupon, right? Where if someone is talking to you and they're like, oh yeah, my neighbor's dog just had TPLO surgery. It's like, okay, how about you take it to them, this brochure about how we help dogs dealing with post-op TPLO recovery, and give it to them, this $25 discounts towards an evaluation with us, and you have like a little cards, like that, right? So many ways to kind of like go about it, right? But that's what I mean by internal marketing, is figuring out ways of like how we can make that as intentional as possible. Does that make sense? The other thing I wanted to talk about today was key principles on building those relationships. All right. And for me, one of the best books, one of the best resources you can read on this. Oops, I almost knocked down my water bottle. Let me see, because I have the background thing. Is this going to show? There you go. How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie. But anyways, it's one of my favorite books. It's a classic if you haven't heard of it. Actually, I even went on to look. I was like, when was this written again? It was written in 1936, guys. So it's not anything groundbreaking, but it is something that still stands the test of time in terms of like, how do we build a relationship with people? And if you don't know Dale Carnegie, he's great at it. Later on, his followers, if you will, created, I think it's like the Dale Carnegie Institute. They do courses. There's a lot of stuff. But like, if you haven't read or listening to this audiobook, How to Win Friends and Influence People, highly recommend in terms of figuring it out, like, how to, how to talk to people, how to build those connections and like that kind of stuff. That was one of the first books I read when I started on this journey, and it was incredibly, incredibly helpful. And there is one quote on it that I put it here on my notes, just because it's related to dogs and I thought it would be relevant, where he talks about, and I quote, "Actions speak louder than words. And as Maia says, I like you. You make me happy. I'm glad to see you. That's why dogs make such a hit. They're so glad to see us that they almost jump out of their skins. So naturally, we're just glad to see them." That's a quote that I thought would be very relevant and stuff, because it's true, right? We all know how true that is. So there's a lot of concepts that I think you can take from it. So of course, I'm not going to dive deep into that book, but there's a few things over here that I put down that I just wanted to touch upon before we wrap up for today. So the first one, anytime you're trying to build any of those relationships, being veterinarians, community events, pet businesses, even like building a relationship with clients and all that kind of stuff, is to be interested and not just interesting. Meaning, don't make it so much about you. Find a way to find a connection with them. Show that you have done your homework. Like I said about the lunch and learns, all I need is 10 to 15 minutes to know and do my homework. It's like, okay, who I'm talking to, right? Because I want to be able to go in and show them that, like, I know who you are. Like, as a side note, but kind of like similar kind of ways, like when we have any job ads up, and one of the very first question actually we ask on the initial phone interview is, what do you like best about the Canine PT? Basically, I want to, and I don't care about the answer. All I'm trying to see is, like, have you done your research? Did you learn about us? Did you take 5 to 10 minutes to look at our websites? Right? And I can tell if people have done that or not. And if they haven't, like, boom, like, over. Like, that candidate is not going to move up on our recruiting process. So find ways to figure it out, how you can be interested. Asking them how I can help you, how I can help your clientele. If it's a new veterinary clinic, how I can help you get exposure, how I can help you get new patients. And just a quick story, once we started doing that nurturing process with veterinary partners, there was one holiday year, I don't remember what year it was, if it was 2020 or 2021, but we put together some holiday baskets, and our operations manager went around those handful of clinics one afternoon to drop them off. And I asked them, if she had the opportunity to talk to them, to just ask them, like, hey, is there anything else we can do, to help you guys, whatever it may be. So one of the clinics, she was talking to their operations manager, and we knew them pretty well. And she asked them, actually, I take it back, it was the medical director. And she asked, she was like, hey, is there anything we can do? And literally, the response we got from the medical director was, just keep doing what you guys are doing, because our clients are raving about the experience you're getting with them. And I'm like, cool, that's easy. We can keep doing what we're doing, right? That's the easiest part of it, right? But it's just asking them, it's just showing them that, like, let us know how we can make this better. Second thing, kind of like tightens up to it a little bit, is give, don't just ask. But a common mistake when trying to make these connections with other businesses, or if you're attending like a business networking event or something like that, is for us to just go in and talking a lot about us, talking a lot about what we do without being prepared to give first, right? And remember that in the long run, one of the best ways to build any connection with other businesses is to give without necessarily even expecting anything in return. If something comes back in return, great. I'm going to be now even more willing to give it to you, right? But let me give it to you. Let me refer patients to you, and then we'll build that relationship, right? And that can work extremely well over time. And then finally, last thing, so we can wrap it up, having an abundance mindset. I think that that's so important, like throughout our field, especially as the field grows, especially when there is quote unquote more competition. And even not just competition from other canine rehab facility guys, but even from other professionals doing things that complement well what we do. Don't be afraid of connecting with other professionals, with other people who do those things, who might be seen as a competitor, right? Now, if they're not open to that conversation, if they're not open to that partnership, that's okay. You did your part, and that's on them, then not on you. But we refer out. So if we feel like a dog would really benefit from underwater treadmill, or someone really wants to do that, we have places that we refer out for that kind of stuff. Or in our case, we have a veterinarian that does acupuncture at our clinic, but she's limited because she's only here once or twice a month. So we refer out for acupuncture as well. Massage therapy as well. If I feel like a dog would benefit from, especially a massage therapist that will go to their home, we try to refer out and we work together as much as possible with it. Right? Does it work every time? No. But I can tell you that the times that it has worked, it has turned into good partnerships. And if it doesn't work, then I'm not going to send them a referral again, and that's okay, right? But I did my part. So for example, a large specialty center around us, I shared this on my podcast, but about 9 months or so ago, and they have their own rehab department, but about 9 months ago, they start getting very pushy about trying to get people to do rehab only with them, to the point where we had a couple of patients that we sent there for a surgical consult, and then they got surgery later on, and they were very pushy to keep those patients going there. One of them, a patient that had been seeing us for a couple of years because we helped recover one knee, and now they need a surgery on the other knee, right? Now, what happened? It's like, okay, I'm not going to refer to you anymore, right? You broke that trust. You broke that bond that we had between each other. Now, they might not care because they're a large specialty center, and that's okay, right? But I did my part. I was collaborating, right? So I think it's important for our field, regardless if you are a PT, a physio, a chiro, veterinarian, a technician, massage therapist, canine fitness trainer, a myofascial therapist, whatever it may be, for us to have this abundance mindset that we can all collaborate, we can all work together, that there is plenty of dogs that need our help over there. And the more of us that can do this, the more of us that can kind of like help them, the better off we're all going to be. So that's the last thing I wanted to share when it comes to that.
Francisco, thank you so much.
If you enjoyed this podcast, please hit the subscribe button so you get notified every time I load a new podcast. I'm here every week talking to vet rehab therapists from all over the world about all things vet rehab. A big thanks to our sponsor, Paw Prosper. Their sponsorship allows us to be able to give this podcast to you for free, so please go and check them out at pawprosper.com. Don't forget to bookmark the next Vet Rehab Summit on Saturday, the 8th of November, 2025. Come and be a part of the world's largest online veterinary rehabilitation conference created specifically for you, the vet rehabber community. Online Pet Health members get VIP complimentary access to the Vet Rehab Summit. For more information about continuing education for vet rehabbers, you can go to onlinepethealth.com.